I want to go to the other article you actually wrote on Monday of this week, though, which was wind and solar are the altcoins of energy.
Hmm.
And I want to, if you don't mind further elaborating, I thought your paragraph where you broke down like what is energy on a first principles basis, I thought
Hmm.
that was excellent and would love if you could just share with our audience sort of how you came to those type of drawdowns of what energy really is and how we should rethink of it.
Yeah, energy from first principles. If you think about it, it's a way to do work, right? Like that's the physics definition. It's the capacity to do work. And the more energy you have, the more you can do stuff, right? Move a heavy rock, or dig something out of the ground, or place this over here, or drill something into this, or whatever. That's how things literally get built, right? Like if you want to make a computer chip, there's a lot of work that's involved, and all that work requires energy. That's from first principles. That's essentially what energy is. And it comes from and if you follow that train of logic, the more energy you have, the more things you can build, and the better a civilization you will make. And like at the beginning, we started with just manual labor, and that was the energy that we get from food is essentially going into building boats, or um, spears, or homes, or whatever. And you did everything with your hands, and that's very labor intensive, and it doesn't scale very well. But then we started discovering stuff like fire, and we use like hydropower and wind power with windmills and dams and things of that nature. And those were, pretty innovative, during the Middle Ages and even Roman times and so on. And those made things more efficient, and you could do more things and build wonderful structures. What really supercharged civilization is the discovery that you can use fossil fuels for energy, and you could dig up coal out of the ground, or oil extract oil. Natural gas came later, but using these things, you can essentially multiply the labor of people, and that's what energy really is. It's a way to multiply the labor that you have. So it makes our time more valuable. The reason why productivity continues to increase is that we have better and better multipliers on our labor. It's not because we're more productive per se. I mean, Americans are working longer, but in a sense, like the the hours that we work for each unit of time that we work, it's way more efficient. 100 years ago, you didn't have, the modern farming equipment that you do now. So you had to do things either with a horse or something like that, or farm animals, or use manual tools, some of which might save you some labor as well. But ultimately, when you have like the $1 million farming tractor or whatever, you could do the work of like 100 people, like very, very quickly, right? With just one person. And that's what energy actually does. And fossil fuels have been that multiplier almost all over the world for lots of things from 200 years on. And this is a thing that a lot of people don't realize is it's still continuing to be used, and it's the cheapest and most affordable. Yet it gets vilified by the environmentalists, and instead they're pushing something clearly inferior: solar and wind, which only supplies one type of energy, specifically electricity. It's not very portable, it's not very reliable, and it takes up way too much real estate. And that's why I call it an altcoin, because it's being pushed on us. It's marketed towards us, much in the same way altcoins are. And this is what fiat money lets the government do. It's control people through propaganda. And so most people, or the cultural zeitgeist is that, oh, wind and solar are great because they're clean. Well, if you actually look into it, it's not clean at all, right? Like you need all these like rare earth metals and weird things that for every wind turbine and solar panel that you have to extract from the environment just as much as you do like oil or gas or any of those things. And like to construct like a Tesla battery or something like that, you have to basically strip mine various places in the world to go do that. So it's a narrative being pushed on us, and it's a way to specifically keep a lot of developing countries down. And that was something that I really wanted to point out in the article, because if you do go back to first principles, all of these developing countries aren't allowed to have access to fossil fuels. And they do this with the IMF and green energy and stuff like that. They tell them basically, if you want our money, you can't build coal power plants or have an oil refinery or whatever. That's ours. Or you have to go and use wind and solar. And of course, those are very expensive. And like don't let anyone tell you it's actually cheaper or whatever. That's after all of the government subsidies and so on. And it's not very reliable. So if you don't have reliable power, then you can't make factories and stuff like that, or they're going to be much less efficient than if you're actually running them with on-demand power, which coal, gas, and nuclear allow. And that's the real problem, is that a lot of these things are ways for first world countries to oppress developing countries, and it's a lot like the IMF in that regard. And I think it's horribly unjust, and it's a boondoggle. And yeah, I've said enough. I'll let you guys comment.
No, I mean, look, to your point, and I'm not going to try to act like I'm either an energy expert or an expert on what's going on in Sri Lanka, but like, it's exactly that. It's these mandates that the country tried to adhere to that they couldn't afford to operate under. And then as a result, like they're out of energy. Like they don't
Mm,
have any oil. They're running out of food as a result because of all of these ESG requirements. And I'm curious what your thoughts are just on the broader ESG narrative and how that fits into this whole like clean energy. Let's get off of fossil fuel. Like it all feeds into one another.
mhm.
And I'm curious where ESG, how big of an effect it has on all of this, in your
Yeah,
opinion.
ESG is like the IMF. People see it as benevolent, but I think it's a horrible tool of oppression. It's a way to restrict people or to give a monopoly to certain favored groups or whatever. The dirty secret of wind and solar is that almost all of them are backed up by natural gas or coal power plants because they're not reliable enough, right? Like, so you build this thing, and solar power only works during the day, obviously, because there's no sun shining in the evening. Wind power only works when it's windy. And so in order to balance that out, they just fire up a natural gas power plant to supply energy to make up the difference. Now, like the obvious question at that point should be, well, if they're doing that, why have wind or solar at all? Because then you can just supply all of the energy with the natural gas power plant at the same time. And like it doesn't make any logical sense. And much like Keynesian economics that the IMF works under, yeah, like none of this stuff actually works. And that's kind of the point, is so much of it is sold as something that's beneficial for people, for these countries, when it's actually not. And I want to point out that a lot of these ideas I got through reading Fossil Future, which is set to be released pretty soon. But Alex Epstein wrote this, and he's he has the book, just laying out like the moral case for fossil fuels. And it's I don't think I could find a hole in there. It's like literally pro-human to be pro-fossil fuels, and anti-human to be pro-solar or wind, because what you're doing is preventing developing countries from developing. That's literally anti-civilization, right? They could be building up roads and buildings and like clean water filtration systems and making wells or whatever. Instead, there's like, yeah, that's the one. There instead
Really
there's a
quickly, we will have Alex Epstein on to talk about this book that Jimmy is ranting about
yeah.
on Tuesday on the show.
Yeah, you definitely should, and I would tune in for that. But the big thing is you're preventing all of these countries from developing, much like the IMF does, and ESG is kind of the same thing. It's a way to give a monopoly to the favored people. It's a subset of the Cantillon effect, right? Where you subsidize or you give loans to the people that you favor. So I know some oil executives and people like that, they can't get a loan from Wells Fargo, right? Like the bank won't give them a loan. But if you have like a wind farm project, you can get a loan. Like this is how the Cantillon effect works. You get a loan, you get freshly printed money if you are in compliance with whatever the authorities want you to do. If you're not, then you're going to get screwed. And in a sense, like this is like this is the thing that the government is starting to realize. Like the ESG narrative against Bitcoin is really a fiat narrative against Bitcoin. It's, hey, we can't be in control of these things anymore. And it comes under our jurisdiction because of this particular thing, and therefore you need to listen to us, or something like that. And that's a horrible sort of like way of controlling people, because you're essentially taking away their productivity through taking away their like capacity to build stuff. This is how Rome fell. This is how every civilization falls, is through all of this grift and rent seeking that goes on, where progress just doesn't happen because the powers that be decide what's good or not. Like there's a story of this Chinese emperor. I can't remember his name, but he inherited, I guess, as an emperor, like this large fleet of ships that were going out and doing all this trade and stuff like that. He decided instead that they were a waste of money, burned all the ships, and invested in social programs. And that ended up being sort of like China's MO right up until about 20 years ago, right? Like they were very insular and sort of like, okay, we have to provide for our own people. He didn't realize that creating something for everybody is beneficial. And that was like, or trading with other people and participating in the global economy. Instead, he looked inward, and that's unfortunately what the ESG narrative is. It's a focus inward on stuff that's not even good science, I don't think, and that's really just a way to control people.
Sometimes I have a hard time finding where the mute button is. um, Jimmy, I'm curious. Like we're bearing witness to, I think, the culmination of an attempt to get off of this fossil fuel reliance, and then realizing, hey, we're actually not ready for that, bearing witness to what we're seeing in Europe and the way Russia has been able to sort of control energy exports to much of Eastern and Central Europe. Um, I'm curious where your thoughts are on the future of energy and how fossil fuels fit into that future.
Yeah, I think fossil fuels are here to stay. And this is something that I point out in the article, is that if you think you can get rid of fossil fuels, you're crazy and you have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Because you look at fossil fuels and what it enables, and you would have to get rid of all of those things. So cheap transportation, air travel, all manner of plastics. You can't get any of that stuff if you take away oil, for example, right? Like you can't have air travel on anything. I guess you can try like using hydrogen and trying blimps again or something like that. But like you can't have air travel the way we have it now without an efficient energy source like jet fuel. And the fact of the matter is that, like, we're talking about net zero, right? Like, oh, we want to eliminate all this stuff. That's lunacy. I honestly think that's lunacy, because you are um, essentially saying, okay, let's get rid of all this because there might be more carbon dioxide in the air, including air travel and all these plastics and all these products. I mean, like, fossil fuel products are everywhere. Like, literally almost everything that you touch or use every day, like, they probably have some petroleum product in it. And we don't recognize these things as, oh, okay, well, we should stop drilling, and like, just pay way more for the substitutes that would come on, or like just do without these things. It's an anti-human thing. The thing is, like, uh, you need fossil fuels for a lot of this stuff, and it's especially good for developing countries. And this is something that a lot of people just completely refuse to understand. Kind of like with Bitcoin, right? It's enormously useful for developing countries because they can say no to the IMF. Fossil fuels would be very useful, but they're prevented from using it. So I think it's here to stay. I think as countries like El Salvador get off of the dollar standard and go towards a Bitcoin standard, what they'll realize is, hey, if we fire up a coal plant, everyone can have reliable electricity. Or if we figure out how to build a nuclear power plant, everyone can have reliable electricity. And maybe we can start refining oil for something that we find off the coast, or maybe we can start doing some offshore drilling or something like that, and then they can get their industry and develop. And that's the dream of every developing country, is to get to become more developed. And the unfortunate thing is, with all of these restrictions like ESG, they're prevented from doing so, and somehow we see it as compassion when it's not.
I'm curious how much do you equate the ESG mandates and stuff to be like virtue signaling, self-serving versus actually no, virtue signaling towards citizens and the masses versus being self-serving and in the self-interest of these countries that are developed to essentially prevent developing nations from reaching that sort of status and level.
Yeah, I think it's much more the latter. And the ESG mandates, like, definitely increase the monetary imperialism that most of them have. And if you keep them dependent on you, if the thing is, soon as you have like a good domestic industry, you can be self-sufficient monetarily, right? Like, if you, and this was the case for Venezuela until Chavez took over. They had actually a very good resource. It was kind of like, it was a booming economy, and they were able to participate in the world economy. And they've turned it back into sort of like a developing country again by all of these socialist programs. But if you have a really good domestic industry, you can become a developed country. And like, for any industry, you're going to need lots of energy inputs, because you're not going to be able to compete against anybody else if you don't have good energy inputs. Like, what's if you have a natural resource that's not found anywhere else, what's going to happen is, well, just go ship it to China and they'll take care of the manufacturing. You're not going to have a domestic industry. You're going to be participating in somebody else's domestic industry. And in fact, that's more or less what the rest of the world does. If you look at who trades with who, everybody trades with China as like their top trading partner, because that's where all of the manufacturing goes. And that's where all the industry and civilization building honestly are at this point, instead of in these countries. So you don't develop infrastructure, heavy equipment, machinery, factories, capital goods, really. None of that goes into these developing countries, because you're lacking one of the most basic inputs that all of those things need, which is energy.